by default, we run around thinking that our mind is us, right? Like there's this sense of us. Every thought that I have is meaningful, it's important, it's accurate, that we can trust our perception, we can trust our interpretations. And I want to say, you can't.
You're listening to episode 181 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April Seifert and I'm your host. And this week we are continuing our series of diving into some of the really fundamental things that, frankly, we wish every single person knew about their mind, because it would help you interpret and understand the experience that you have just day to day in life, and help you understand a bit more about why you might be thinking the way that you are, why you might be reacting or feeling a certain way in certain situations. So this week, as I mentioned, we're unpacking yet another one of those fundamental concepts. Now, before we dive into that, and before I get to saying hello to Ashley, who is joining me again for this episode, I want to take just a second and just touch back in with people now that we're moving into the month of July. We're a bit into this month. Summer is going. Things are still, at least where I'm at with COVID, things are still a little bit weird around here. I just want to take a second and check back in and see how everybody's doing. I want you to think a little bit about the experience that you've had over the last couple of months. And I want you to just, for a moment, just practice a little bit of self-compassion and gratitude for your ability to get through everything that you've gone through so far in the last handful of months. This is an unprecedented situation that we have all gone through. And if there's one thing that Ashley and I in our conversations have come back to again and again, it's just the gratitude for having worked hard to develop psychological strength ourselves, because it's allowed both of us to come through this experience and feel like we're thriving, even though things aren't perfect and even though things aren't going exactly the way that we would want them to go. So take just a moment, intense gratitude for yourself for getting to this point, and our biggest gratitude for you for coming back to the podcast week and week again and making the commitment to continue building psych strength for yourself, because it definitely pays off for sure when times are good, but really so when times are bad.
For sure.
Well, hello. So welcome to Ashley. On that note, we're really excited about this week's episode. We are diving into a fundamental concept, again, that we wish everybody knew about their mind. Ashley, do you want to introduce us and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, I've said for years, I wish they taught this stuff in schools, because I think it is just core information. And I'm thrilled that we have this opportunity, this platform to do it. And as you were saying, I really appreciate the nod to gratitude. Both I know you and I are very grateful. And the topic we're going to talk about today is one that is instrumental in changing how you navigate through life. And it's one that, that I spend a ton of time in my one-on-one work with people, teaching them all about their mind, all about their thoughts, all about the problems that can happen when we're dominated by our thoughts. And so I'm thrilled to get into the weeds with this today. And that's, you guys may have heard the saying, you are not your thoughts. And certainly if you get our emails, you've heard that before. If you've done any of our workshops, you've heard that before. But I want to talk a little bit more about that. And I can say, for, 15 years now, I've been in the business of helping people change their thoughts and change the impact that certain thoughts have on them. And yet I know for myself, my reaction to that, you are not your thought statement, has shifted over the years. So I want to just throw out, if you hear that and you're thinking, that makes no sense, or that's dumb, hang in there, because it will by the end of this. And when you can really grasp what that concept means, it will unlock a whole new way of being. Think of that. It always makes me think of Neo in the Matrix when he takes the red pill or the blue pill, and I can't remember which one. Kind of opens his eyes. But we're about to take that pill. Yeah. We want to unlock things.
And the one you can't go back from, because once you've seen the Matrix, you can't unsee the Matrix. You just see it happening in your own life and in others. Mm-hmm. I want to reiterate something Ashley said, because this was the case for me too. And let's be clear, you're talking to you're listening to two doctoral level psychologists right now. We are trained in this stuff. And yet both of us, when we heard the sentence, you are not your thoughts, we're like, what does that even mean? Right. Like, what are you even talking about? That makes no sense at all. So what we wanted to do with this episode, so if you're feeling that way, hey, you're in good company. You've got two professional psychologists here who are saying they also did not understand this. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to do is sort of systematically go through what that means, give you some analogies, give you some examples, talk about what it looks like to feel like your thoughts are you, and what it means when you can sort of break that connection and why that's important. So this is going to be one of those episodes where we're going to do a little teaching, but we're also going to talk a lot about the practical applications for this and how it can impact, we're big on this, impact your day-to-day experience.
Right. Can I jump in? Because I was thinking about this and, the conversations that I have with people and what it actually means. And I think one thing that's really important is that by default, we run around thinking that our mind is us, right? Like there's this sense of us. Every thought that I have is meaningful. It's important. It's accurate, that we can trust our perception. We can trust our interpretations. And I want to say, you can't. Mm-hmm. And it made me think of like the Wizard of Oz, how Dorothy and friends, they go in and there's this giant wizard head and it seems all knowing and sometimes scary and it's bossy. And what they found out though, is that it was all an illusion, that there was some weird little guy behind the curtain, right? And that's kind of the same thing when it comes to us. There's a part of you, sure. But your mind is kind of like the guy behind the curtain. It's dictating things. It's saying things. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's bossy. Sometimes it's really helpful and gives great advice, but it's separate from you. And it is not all knowing. It is not all powerful. It is not even accurate. But when you are your thoughts, what we mean by that phrase is the term is fused. And that means that your thoughts feel real, meaningful, in control. So basically, your thoughts dominate what you do and how you feel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something that I want to bring up, I love that analogy. I love the Wizard of Oz analogy because it's a facade, right?
Yeah, that's the word.
Something that I want to bring up and unpacking how this facade happens, because I think that really helps people see it for what it is, like take the pill. We're just going to throw out a bunch of movie quotes and analogies. Bear with us. Oh man. Neo and the Wizard of Oz. So it'll help you take the pill if you understand the mechanisms through which this happens. We have, and this is a fundamental principle to what we're talking about today and to so many other things. We have two main ways of processing information in our mind. We've got the deliberative, really intentional. It's effortful. Like if I told you to do math, you would rely on this cognitive process. It's the one you have to work hard for. It's the one that you use when you feel skeptical and you're trying to like tease apart somebody's argument. It's the part that you are in like voluntary control of.
On purpose thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's about 20% of what we do. The other 80% is stuff that is involuntary or out of our control. Now, some of that isn't as relevant to what we're talking about today, but a good chunk of it is just think mental habits, things that we have learned throughout our lives, things that have repetitively happened to us or that we've experienced. And we've learned that if you touch a hot stove, you pull your hand off. If you're in situations that have certain characteristics, you might think or feel a certain way. And that part of our mind, this subconscious, involuntary, not deliberative part, it basically runs on involuntary autopilot. It's just a set of habits that are getting triggered outside of your control. And it runs all day, every day. It's as though there's this amazing analogy that I read in a book one time. It's as though you have inside your mind, think about you as being the deliberative part of your mind, right? The on purpose thinking, that's you. And you have an annoying roommate who is the involuntary part. And that roommate has an opinion and something to say about absolutely everything that's happening, and they won't stop talking. So it's you in there, and then you've got your roommate who won't stop talking, and they're separate. And so think about that in terms of processes. Like as you're going through your day, your mind is picking up little bits of information that your roommate is then commenting on, but that isn't you, even though it might feel like it is.
Right. Well, and I know we've talked before, just another metaphor here, comparison, right? Like your brain is an organ, like your stomach is an organ, and it's just part of your body and it's got a job to do. And your stomach, it growls when you need food, and it gurgles and it digests, and we acknowledge what it does and we may act on it, right? Like if I'm hungry, I'm going to go have a snack, but I'm not I'm not at its beck and call, right? Like we've all had.
You don't feel like your identity is wrapped up in your stomach growling? Like, no.
Yeah, I don't have to do what it said. Like, I don't have to eat immediately, right? I can certainly overeat even when my stomach's like, dude, slow down. So there's this part where, and to your point, I would never say like, oh, I am a gurgle. I am a growl, right? Like it's just something that my body does. It's kind of separate from me. And we like to say, your brain is the organ and your mind is what it does, right? So, and your mind is this thought generating machine. It creates thoughts. It's constantly spitting them out. Those are like stomach gurgles. The only difference is, unless you have built the psychological strength to recognize thoughts as gurgles or mental hiccups or just a thing that your mind does, it's going to dominate you. And by dominate, I mean it's going to influence, it's going to control, it's in charge. And if we go back to, April, what you were saying about this subconscious piece that's just like passively soaking up stuff and spitting things out, there is no sophisticated evaluation process, right? Are these thoughts accurate? Are they helpful? No, it just spits it out. It would be like reading, like I read this analogy once that I liked, where it kind of talked about the subconscious as like reporters and politicians and government officials, and they're all doing behind the scenes work. And then they put together a newspaper and all you get is the headlines. You have no idea about the work that goes on behind the scenes. So you get these thoughts and it's just a headline. You're an idiot. You're amazing. This is going to be terrible, right? We just get these headlines. But think about it like this. Some of those headlines are coming from reputable sources, the Washington Post, the New York Times. Some of them are coming from BuzzFeed. Some of them are coming from the National Enquirer, right? And the thing is,
that's awesome.
Unless you've built the psychological strength, you don't know the difference.
I love that So much. I love that so much. And I want to unpack one more little piece about the why behind this happens, how this happens. And then we can kind of get into what it feels like and what to do about it and why that's all important, because holy cow, it is. Through what we're basically talking about here with this, subconscious thought process forming or whatever, we're talking about the process of neuroplasticity. This is like a good thing that our mind knows how to do. We encounter new information. It's repetitive enough. We wire it in, and it's something that we just think or believe or can do with less effort, just like any other habit, any other, bit of practice that you might do. A basketball player practicing free throws, the more you practice, the more easily you can do it. Our mind has that ability to form muscle memory, to keep with that analogy. And it's in the form of this neuroplasticity. But there are, and this is where we get into a really key word that Ashley uses a lot, and you've already used it a couple of times, so I want to unpack it quite a bit. There are times when that neuroplasticity has wired in something that's super helpful for us, right? Like, in your job, if there's a particular, thought process or a particular thing that you need to go through on a regular basis, think pilots, they're going to land a plane. There's a checklist that is like embedded in their brain about the things that they need to do to land that plane. And I bet they can rattle that off like it's nothing because they've practiced it so many times. They know it really well. So there are times when this is helpful. There are also times when this is not helpful. I'll give you a good example, and I want us to just like nail on this word of whether it's helpful or not. When I was getting ready to go on the stage to do my TEDx talk, I have never had more mental chatter about random things that I hadn't even considered as things I should be worried about. Look at that. And here's my roommate talking. Look at that. There's a step right there. What if you trip when you walk up the steps? I bet you haven't zipped up your zipper on your pants. I bet you're going to forget to give the definition of this thing at the right point. And now your whole thing your whole talk from that point forward won't make sense. Like just chatter, 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 chatter. The thing that the habit that was running in my mind at that time, and I know this because I've studied this long enough, is that my mind was recognizing, hey, it's really important for you to look really good when you're up there, to look like you have it together and like you've prepared really well. And I'm afraid that you're going to let yourself down. There's some risk here. And I'm going to start throwing you thoughts and feelings that are getting you to either take this seriously or maybe back out of this situation that feels really risky. Like maybe we better just avoid what we're about to do. In that situation, not helpful.
Right.
It also has nothing to do with how I'm actually going to perform. The fact that I had the thought that I'm going to trip up the stairs doesn't mean that I'm going to trip up the stairs. It has nothing to do with that. It was just thoughts that my mental roommate was sending me that, I had to recognize as a very separate thing from myself in order to move forward and have my head in the game to deliver the talk that I wanted to deliver. So this helpful versus unhelpful thing is something that Ashley talks about a lot that I think is really key to know.
Yeah, I love that you shared that example, April. And it makes me think about, there are times when I tend to frame the mind as a giant jerk, right? That it's kind of out to get you or get in your way or hold you back. Because in that case, if you had said, all right, roommate, I hear you. Good looking out. Thanks. And bailed.
Bye.
That would have sucked, right? You might have felt better in that moment, but then you would have missed out on this incredible goal. Right. And so, I love that you shared that because it's just such a prime example of using psychological strength, and particularly this facet of what we call diffusion, which is where you're able to take this mental step back, recognize your thoughts for what they are. That is simply a thought. That's just a string of sounds, letters, or images that my mind is spitting out at me. It's my mental stomach growl. And you were able to recognize in that case, oh, this is not helpful. If I fuse with these thoughts, if I let them dominate, influence, and control me, it's going to take you away from what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And this stuff, I gosh, man, there's so much we can talk about here. And I know we want to talk about some of the practical applications because it's super powerful. But if you're into this and you're starting to have those thoughts of, wow, this could be a game changer, A, it can be, for sure. And B, we get so into this in a very practical, real way in our brand new foundational course called Ascend. So if you want to learn some more, we're going to tell you about it, and we'll be right back.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if, instead, you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. All right, you guys. So that commercial gave you just a little bit of information about our signature course. We're running it on a beta basis right now. So if you are at all interested in diving into the areas of you, your mind, your life, this is the time to enroll, because the price of that course will never be as low as it is right now. As I mentioned, we're in beta, so we're still working out a few kinks, but you will have access to this course for life. So at every upgrade we do, every enhancement we do, you get access to it. So now's the time to enroll if you are interested. Something I want to get into a little bit that we talked about just before we took a break was this notion of diffusion and why it's so important. I gave that example of this TEDx talk and how, exactly as you mentioned, if I would have listened to my thoughts at that stage, if I would have fused with them and allowed them to dictate my feelings and my actions, I wouldn't have this TED talk that I'm really proud of to this day. I wouldn't have it. We also, something that I want to make really clear is that those thoughts that we repetitively have, the more times we have those thoughts, the more they feel authentic to who we are. So the more times you have the thought, oh, I'm not really good at public speaking, or I'm not really great in negotiation situations, or I'm just not really a creative person. The more times you have that, neuroplasticity kicks in, it becomes a tighter, more embedded think of it that way, like a tighter pattern in our mind. It becomes easier for it to bubble up in circumstances that feel like they're relevant. And the ease with which those thoughts come up make it feel like it's authentic, as though it's us or as though it's true, even if it's not objectively true.
Yeah. Well, and then the twisted part is, here's a little mental math for you. When your mind throws a thought at you and you say, cool, yeah, I like this one. And you do that by acting on it, right? By taking it as truth, by letting it control your actions, your mind learns, oh, cool, she liked this thought. I'm going to keep giving it to her. So it becomes this sort of self-feeding cycle, right? The more we think it, then we act on it, means that we're going to have those thoughts more and more and more. Those connections get wired more tightly and more thickly, so they feel more real. They happen faster, right? Because you may have other parts of your mind throwing out alternative thoughts, right? Like think about, you can argue with yourself. You can have multiple thoughts at a time, but that one that's been reinforced would be the term. So strengthened, it's going to come faster.
You gave an example on a workshop one time that was like, imagine if you have this barking dog, right? Barking dog, barking dog, barking dog. And, you know, it's trying to get food from you. And then you give it food, meaning you act on its bark. It's you strengthening the fact that you want it to come back and bark at you again. And we started talking about this notion of acting in accordance with our thoughts when they are unhelpful and not actually what we legitimately want to be doing, as feeding the dog. You're just feeding the dog who is barking. And you have to make this intentional decision that I hear you, I acknowledge that you're barking, I'm choosing to do something differently. So maybe we can go into a few ways that people can start to make a better choice when realistically their mind is throwing them thoughts that either are irrelevant or unhelpful, or ones that are making them feel kind of a gross or friction sort of feeling. Let's go into maybe some hands-on things people can do.
Yeah, I've got, there's so many.
I know, there's a ton.
Again, the first piece that's critical, it's kind of shifting your perspective on thoughts. And then we're back to, you are not your thoughts. A thought is just an occurrence that's happening. It's like turning on a news station and it's shouting a story at you. You can watch it or you can change the channel. And that's different because most people deep down, if we really push, have a belief that they are in charge of their minds, that they can control their thoughts. You can't. That's our whole point in giving you this background on the subconscious, is it's going to spit stuff out at you whether you want it to or not. So the more you can kind of wrap your head around that concept, the better off you're going to be. Then there's so many things, but for quick, like here's a hands-on tip that you can start to do right this second. I teach people a lot about labeling.
I love that.
Sometimes people will call it noting, but think of it like this. Your cell phone rings, you pick it up, it's a telemarketer. Do you answer that call? No, you don't pick up the phone and say like, oh, no, thank you, I'm not interested, right? You just look at it and you set it down. We can do the same thing with our thoughts. So when a thought comes in, like all of those what ifs, April, that you were talking about, or in your TEDx talk, a what if is a worry, period. I don't care what comes after the what if blank. What if is a worry. So I teach people and that's what I say when they come to me and say, but what if I mess up? My response is, what if is a worry. And if you start to do that mentally, when your mind goes, but what if nope, that's a worry. That's what I mean by labeling. You're kind of identifying the category or the type of mental process. And you could do all kinds of things. Like, that's a negative thought. That's name calling. Like when your mind is like, oh, you're an idiot. That's name calling.
Mm-hmm.
Mind
yeah.
reading.
I love also even, I love this notion of labeling, and I love the notion of pointing out the details of what are coming along with that thought. And I'm going to go back to my TEDx talk for a second. I remember there have been few times in my life when I've been more nervous. Jumping out of a plane for the first time after I had a baby. There's weird reasons why that one was more nerve-wracking than the first time I ever did it. That was probably more nerve-wracking than this, but it took that amount. It was that scary. I remember thinking, I know how to do this. I know what's happening right now. Like in my mind, I know what's happening right now. And I sat down and I said, okay, I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that this isn't going to go, in general, I'm having a series of thoughts that are telling me that this isn't going to go as well as I want it to go. I'm also noticing that my chest is feeling tight. I'm noticing that my pulse is quickening. I'm noticing that I'm starting to obsess over a certain part of the script that I knew I needed to recite. I started going through very specific details of how my body felt, just physically what was happening with me, just to point them out and to label them as well. Because again, that heart pounding sensation has nothing to do with the amount of practice I had already done. The thoughts I was having has nothing to do with how prepared I was that day. None of that has anything to do with what my performance is likely to be when I walk on stage. It's all separate stuff that's happening that I either can choose to react to or choose not to. And you can make that choice. I love your analogy in that moment to just not pick up your cell phone. You just don't have to.
Right. Well, I love that technique that you're describing, April. And it's sort of taking the labeling or noting a step further. And some people will call that falls into the mindfulness umbrella. I think of it as like being a sports commentator, right? Think of the sports commentators. I wish I could think of an actual one. I don't really watch sports, but they describe the plays on the field, right? And good ones give you the details and just the facts, right? That we don't want necessarily the commentary. We want them to be objective, neutral, right? Not on one side or the other. They're just describing it. And that's exactly what you did. You were just being a sports commentator for your internal experience, right? I'm noticing that I'm having the thought. There's heart pounding, period. So just describing it. And I find that adding that phrase, I'm noticing that, and I'm having the thought that, or I'm having the feeling that, or of, those phrases give you mental distance. Those help you go from fused, where you are one with your thoughts and they are calling the shots, to that distance where you can look at them, where there's that you are not your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I'm noticing that. I'm having the thought that. Mm-hmm. Very, very different than it's going to go badly.
Yeah.
Or whatever the thought is.
Yeah. I'm having this thought, so therefore it means, like, it objectively, without fail, definitely accurately means that this is going to go badly. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just like a thing that came up because you're scared. Right. It's okay. Yeah. Something else that I want to note, and we go into this in depth in Ascend because it's so important, but we'll give you just a little flavor of it now because you can definitely use this. As we're closing out this episode, we talk a lot in the Ascend program about what we call the committee of voices in your head. There are probably familiar ones. You guys have probably heard about this notion of the inner critic. There's a critic that steps up. There's also, think about the movie. We're going to keep doing movies. Think about the movie Inside Out, right? You've got this voice of disgust, and then you've got anger, and he knows one swear word and he's ready to use it. And, you've got all these voices in your mind, and they all have their tendency to pop up at certain circumstances. If you can label any unhelpful thoughts as, think of like the worst roommate or the worst coworker or the worst boss or the worst someone ever in your life. If you can just consciously label that voice as that person's name, great. There's Stacy again. Awesome. Thanks, Stacy, for your contribution. But it helps you think about that voice as being a separate entity from you and that it's not you that's actually saying it. So I mentioned we go into this so much more in depth in the program because it's such a key piece, and it's so important to be aware of when and who and how these voices crop up. But minimally, if you can just put it into, this is a helpful voice that I want to pay attention to, that I care about, great. And anything that's not that is Stacy or whoever else. You can diffuse, as Ashley mentioned, you can diffuse from those thoughts and see them as separate from you, that you don't actually have to do what Stacy says. I'm sorry if your name is Stacy. I just literally picked a name.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, you might be thinking that it's a little cheesy, but who's telling you that? That's your mind saying, don't listen to them. Don't try this. That's stupid or it's cheesy. Is that a helpful thought?
Mm-hmm.
Is that one going to help you get control, get free? No.
Yeah. And as we're closing this episode out, I want to talk about why it's so important, because what's on the line, right? You mentioned it with the TEDx example, and this is a big thing in acceptance and commitment therapy, right? There's a reason why you want to achieve that goal. There's something that you actually want out there. There's a goal that you have. There's a feeling that you're after. There's an accomplishment. There's something. And if we're constantly fusing with our thoughts and we're at the whim of just this randomness, seemingly at times, that our mind throws us, we run the risk of never actually getting to accomplish the stuff that we want to do or have the relationships that we want to have, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something, one example I'll give that has been in a past episode of the podcast, I talked a lot about, and I'm bringing this example up because it's in a domain that we haven't talked about yet, to just illustrate this concept that we're talking about today permeates nearly every facet of your life. Yeah. Relationship-wise, we've had past episodes talking about attachment styles, and I've been very open about how I have a very sort of avoidant attachment style. If I allow myself to just behave with what feels natural and what feels normal for me, I have a very avoidant attachment style. There's a number of reasons for that. I think it has a lot to do with my dad passing away and just some fallout from that. Regardless, when I meet new people, especially if they seem like they really like me or they're really accepting, and this can be friends, this was my in-laws, I mean, you name it, my mind starts saying things like, oh my God, you don't actually believe that they want to hang out. You don't actually think, you don't believe this, right? Like, they do not actually want to be with you in the way that it looks. Clearly you're misinterpreting this, or clearly they haven't really gotten to know you yet, because as soon as they do, they're going to leave. So you should probably find a problem now. You should probably put your hands up now and stay arm's distance from these people, because the closer you get to them, reality will set in and this is not going to work. You don't get to have relationships like this. So Stacy is chattering at me. That's just what I'm going to call her from now on. Stacy is chattering at me and telling me that people like me don't have close relationships like that. And if I allow that to happen, deep down, I really want to have good relationships with people. Right. I really want to have a deep and meaningful connection with people. And if I allow Stacy to dictate my actions, that will never happen. And so it's one of those times when that feels so authentic to me, but it isn't. It's Stacy talking. It's not me talking. And I don't have to agree. And it feels rugged in the moment. It feels not right in the moment for me to be like, nope, you're going to answer that phone call and you're going to have a nice conversation with that person. You are going to do it, even though I'm like, no, on the inside. Right. And it always brings you in the direction of what you actually want.
And that's your psychological strength kicking in, right? To be able to do that and to kind of get through the muck. It's yeah, I don't know. You're going on a hike and you hit a point where it's like a mucky, flooded out point, and you can either turn around and go home, but you really want to finish that hike or get to the top of the mountain, you gotta wade through the muck.
Mm-hmm.
And that
So
takes strength.
it does. And I want people to understand that it won't feel good. It'll feel inauthentic because you're going against something that is habitually ingrained in your mind, Stacy, and it's going to feel inauthentic. But this will impact you in your relationships. It'll impact you at work with the way that you interact with others and the types of goals that you set, how much you negotiate or advocate for yourself. It'll interact with you in your hobbies and what types of things you're willing to try, public places, privately by yourself, like across the board. This is an important concept to understand.
Health is a huge one, right? When that mind kicks in of like, I had it happen last night. I'm trying to eat healthier. I'm reading about, the research behind different types of foods. And oh man, that mind was like, you could just support local tonight, which is code for eat out. And I was able to say like, oh no, that's just excuses, right? And it's, in that case, my mind wasn't necessarily trying to be a jerk. It knew I would rather eat a burger than leftover cabbage soup again. And yet, using your psychological strength, I'm able to diffuse from that and to pursue. And I probably would have enjoyed a burger in the moment, but I feel better about my choice to eat more vegetables in the long run.
I love that.
Yeah.
The majority of the time when this Stacy separate person crops up, it will be those involuntary, automatic thoughts. And to just sort of sum up what we're saying here, one of the more important skills that you can learn to do is engage that 20% that's deliberate and determine, okay, if I listen to her or him, whoever you name that voice, if I listen to them, is that going to take me in the direction of something that I want or away from it? And if it's going to take me away from it, just flirt with the idea that you don't have to listen, that you can just disobey. You don't have to listen. And that would be my biggest advice and my biggest wish for you from this episode, is getting really clear on who that voice is and disobeying when it's not helpful.
I love that.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us with this episode. We were in a deep, meaty topic. We probably could have talked for like 6 hours on this. I know.
Oh yeah, I'm reining it in.
It's like really rough, but it is such a foundational topic. And if you're at all interested in this, we would hope you would check out our signature course coming up called Ascend. We are so excited, and for good reason. This is a really big topic that's involved in that course. All right, you guys, have a great week, and thanks so much for joining us.
Bye.
It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.